Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're taking a hard look at a document that lays out a pretty terrifying case against two of the 20th century's most secretive government programs, Project Artichoke and the infamous Project MKUltra.
All right, here's how we're going to break this down. First, we'll get into the source's whole idea of a hidden war. Then, we'll look at what it calls a confession, buried in declassified files. From there, we'll dive into the actual methods of MKUltra, visit one of its most notorious labs, expose the cover-up, and finally, grapple with the project's dark legacy.
So right off the bat, the source document makes a pretty bold claim. It says that to really get what these projects were about, you have to see them in a much bigger context, a silent, ancient war being fought over human consciousness itself. So we're kicking things off with this idea of a war on consciousness. And according to the source material we're looking at, these programs like MKUltra, they weren't just random, isolated events. No, they were key battles in this much larger, much older, hidden conflict.
And get this, the document argues that after early experiments in physics, trying to bend metal and mess with space-time, the real focus of this secret war shifted. It moved from the physical world to the inner world, to the neurology of the human mind itself.
Okay, so how did we get to MKUltra? Well, the source draws a direct and frankly terrifying line. It starts in 1943 with the so-called Philadelphia experiment. The source claims that the mind-breaking effects on the sailors weren't seen as a failure. Oh no, they were seen as the first data points. Then in 51, you get Project Artichoke, designed to basically reverse engineer and weaponize those effects. And by 1953, it all blossoms into Project MKUltra, a full-blown, multi-front war on the human soul.
All right, let's look closer at that middle step, Project Artichoke. This is where things start to get really explicit. The source we're auditing says the project's true purpose is just laid bare in its own declassified memos. You just have to know where to look.
So on paper, officially, Project Artichoke, which kicked off in August 1951, was all about developing special interrogation techniques. That's what the declassified documents say. But the source material argues that this was just a cover story for something way, way darker. You see, this document argues that the goal was never really about making a spy talk. No, it was about something much bigger. It was about creating a programmable human being. The true holy grail, according to this text, was total control. And if you think that sounds like an exaggeration, well, check out this quote. This is from a declassified CIA memo from 1952. Can we get control of an individual to the point where he will do our bidding against his will and even against fundamental laws of nature such as self-preservation? I mean, wow. The source presents this as the smoking gun, the signed confession. That is not the language of interrogation. That's the language of enslavement. So that ambition, that goal of total control, it was fully unleashed on April 13, 1953. That's when we see the launch of the project most people have heard of, Project MKUltra, headed up by a CIA chemist named Dr. Sidney Gottlieb. And this wasn't just about one single technique. The source describes it as a multi-vector attack, a full-on assault on the human soul. They were using chemical warfare, weaponizing things like LSD, heroin, and scopolamine on people who had no idea they were subjects. They were using biological agents like anthrax, and they were even using electromagnetic warfare, using EM fields to directly mess with brain functions, causing amnesia and altered states. It was like they were attacking consciousness from every possible angle, trying to find the perfect recipe to just shatter a human mind.
Now, to perfect their most extreme techniques, the CIA needed a laboratory, preferably one that looked totally normal to the public, and the source claims they found the perfect front at the Allen Memorial Institute in Montreal, which was run by a Dr. Ewen Cameron.
And this is maybe the most horrifying part of the whole story. The victims, the test subjects for this part of MKUltra, Subproject 68, they weren't spies, they weren't enemies of the state, they were just ordinary people, citizens who checked themselves into a respected hospital because they were dealing with things like anxiety and depression. They were looking for help. And instead, they became guinea pigs in experiments they never, ever consented to. So what exactly did Dr. Cameron do to these people? He developed this two-stage process, an algorithm of soul destruction, as the source calls it. Step 1 was depatterning. Subjects were put into a drug-induced coma for weeks at a time, and then blasted with massive electroshocks to literally erase their memories and personality. Then came Step 2, psychic driving. After their minds were wiped clean, patients were isolated and forced to listen to looped audio messages over and over for 16 to 20 hours a day. It was an attempt to burn a whole new personality onto that blank slate.
And the human cost? Well, it was catastrophic. Just listen to this description of one survivor, Linda McDonald. She described waking up as an incontinent, amnesiac adult, unable to recognize her own children. Her mind, her life, completely shattered.
Okay, so eventually the tide starts to turn. By the 1970s, congressional investigations are starting to sniff around, and the agency realized it needed to hide its tracks, and fast.
So in 1973, the CIA director at the time, Richard Helms, gave a simple verbal order: destroy all files related to Project MKUltra. And the source document is very clear on this point. This wasn't just house cleaning. This was a criminal act. This was destroying evidence of war crimes before Congress could get its hands on it.
And Helms's justification? When he was later under oath, he testified that he had the files destroyed because he didn't want them to be misunderstood. Just let that sink in. 2 decades of torture, of non-consensual human experimentation. He was worried it might be misinterpreted. And you know what? The cover-up was almost perfect. As you can see, an estimated 95% of the records went up in smoke, but they missed something. While all the operational files were being incinerated, a bunch of financial records, about 20,000 pages of them, somehow survived. It was the money trail, and that's what would eventually expose the whole sick program.
So where does that leave us? What are we supposed to take away from all this? Well, the source document's final point is, in my opinion, the most disturbing one of all.
The argument is this: all that knowledge, the science of how to break a person, how to murder a human soul, that didn't get lost in the fire when they burned the documents.
The program might have officially ended, but the science of soul-breaking, it didn't stop. According to this document, it simply went black. It became the foundational science for a whole new generation of unacknowledged, top-secret projects. And that leaves us with a pretty chilling question. What has all that dark knowledge been used for since?